Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler 2 is happening this Saturday as the co-main event, and it's gonna be a wild fight to say the least. If you watched their first fight, you know it was a roller coaster. I'm surprised that some people are expecting this rematch to be an easy fight for Oliveira, because to be honest, that's far from the truth. Chandler is a tough matchup for anyone in that weight class, and a lot of these fans seem to think that Oliveira will just breeze through him because he won the first time, but it wasn't actually an easy fight. It was a back and forth, and it was intense from start to finish. This rematch is going to be thrilling, and honestly, it can go either way. Alright, before I dive in how I think this fight's going to play out, let me just give my official prediction. I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. I know it's a risky pick, especially with the firepower both guys bring. We've got to remember Charles has explosive power and Chandler's no different, so this fight is guaranteed to be pure fireworks. I don't see it going past the first round. I'd actually be shocked if it does. I think Oliveira finishes it in classic style, fast and explosive, and delivering another unforgettable knockout. And look, man, I get why some people are doubting picking Chandler. He hasn't been super active, and the only names he's beaten in the UFC are a past his prime Tony Ferguson and Wash Hooker at the time. Plus, he's 2-3 in his last 5 fights, so I get the criticism. But if you really look at those fights, they were all wild wars. Honestly, I think his losses were more about his own choices than him getting outclassed. Take the fight with Dustin Poirier for an example. Chandler was doing well, but made an explosive, unnecessary takedown attempt that drained his energy, ultimately leading him to get choked out in the later rounds. In the fight with Justin Gaethje, he didn't use his wrestling, and that decision likely cost him a solid chance to win. Yes, he did use it in the second round, but by that time it was already too late. In his first fight with Oliveira, he was winning until he got caught, showing just how close he was pulling off the victory. Chandler's problem is that he always wants to put on the show, and that's pretty much why he keeps getting finished. He's got all the skills and the time, but he just fights so reckless, dude. But Chandler's style is what makes this rematch so exciting and a bit scary at the same time. He's a super intense, explosive fighter who can hang with anyone in the lightweight division, but his biggest hurdle is his own decision making. What makes this fight with Oliveira especially interesting is that Chandler sets that pace in their first matchup. He was the one that was pushing Oliveira back, which is huge because Oliveira usually looks his best when he's the one that's bringing the fight. Defensively, Oliveira has some cracks, especially under pressure. Even in his recent fight with Arman Tsarukyan, he struggled a bit when he got forced against the cage and lost the second round because of it. And that's what's concerning about this rematch. If Chandler can push Oliveira back again, it could be a real problem for Charles. Chandler is powerful, intimidating, and when he's the one pushing forward, it's hard for anyone to stand toe-to-toe with him. This fight isn't just a question of who's better, it's about who's controlling the pace, and that can make all the difference. Because let's be honest, Charles Oliveira's fighting style is all about moving forward and keeping the pressure on his opponent. When he's the one that's pushing the pace, he is in his element, using his striking and his grappling to control the fight. But when he's forced to move backwards, he's just not as effective. One reason is his defense. Oliveira isn't as comfortable fighting off his back foot, so he's more open to attacks when he's retreating. Being on the back foot also makes it hard for him to go for his usual clinch work or a takedown. It limits his options. Plus, Oliveira's whole game is built around dictating the pace. So when someone's pushing him back, it's throwing him off his rhythm and makes him more likely to make a mistake. And honestly, even when Charles Oliveira is pushing the pace and applying pressure, I get a bit nervous for him, especially for this fight. Chandler's power is real, and even though his defense can be shaking, especially when he's on the back foot, he's always a threat, whether he's being offensive or defensive. He's capable of landing something big, and that's the unpredictability is what makes him dangerous. On the flip side though, Chandler's got his own issues. For all the explosiveness, he's not exactly known for technique. He doesn't throw many feints or setup shots. The only time he showed some strategy was in his fight with Dan Hooker, where he went to the body to set up the knockout. But most of the time, he just relies on raw power and athleticism, throwing those big bombs. It works because he's so explosive and intimidating, but it also leaves him open to counters. That's why we've seen him get caught countless times, from Dustin Poirier to Justin Gaethje to Tony Ferguson, and of course Oliveira himself, all managed to drop him or seriously rocked him. In fact, Chandler's been dropped in nearly every fight in his UFC career, except the bout with Dan Hooker. And it's because of his style, it just leaves him open. So while he's got that firepower to put away anyone, he's also just as vulnerable, which makes his matchup with Oliveira even more wild. And that's the reason why I still think Oliveira gets it done. Out of the two, Chandler is the more hittable fighter because he's a bit too aggressive for his own good. He's always charging forward, throwing those big power shots. And while they can be effective, it also leaves him wide open. Instead of mixing things up with his feints or setting up with his punches carefully, he tends just to go straight in, banking on his own explosiveness to overwhelm his opponents. And that's the problem. The style makes him an easy target for counters. Guys like Oliveira, Poirier, and Gaethje have all taken advantage of this by waiting for him to commit to a big swing, then catching him when he's not guarded. Chandler doesn't move his head much and often stays in the pocket for too long after he throws, which has led him to getting clipped or even dropped. So while his offense is powerful, it also opens him up, especially against fighters who know how to capitalize on those defensive gaps. And while Oliveira is hittable, he's shown some real improvement defensively. Charles Oliveira's defense has seriously leveled up, and you can really see it in his fight with Beneil Dariush. He was way sharper with his head movement and footwork, dodging some of Beneil's big punches instead of just taking them. Instead of his old style of getting hit and then firing back, he stayed cool, picked his moments, and slipped his shots, which set him up to land some clean counters. That approach paid off, and he ended up getting the first round TKO. It's clear that he's been working on his defense, and it just makes him that much tougher to deal with. And honestly, I think the longer this fight goes, the more it swings into Charles' favor. Chandler's cardio isn't the best, and he doesn't pace himself well. He's always looking for that big knockout shot, so if Charles can push it into like the late second round, that's when we usually start to see Chandler slow down and it becomes a lot more hittable. When it comes to the grappling, I think they're mostly going to cancel each other out and end up keeping it on the feet. In their first fight, Chandler took Oliveira down, but didn't stay there long because Oliveira is super dangerous with his submissions. Now, don't get me wrong, Chandler is explosive enough to avoid getting caught, but he probably doesn't want to risk it. So I see him trying to keep things standing. If Chandler does go for a takedown, he might control Oliveira briefly, but Oliveira is always hunting for submissions from his back, so that pretty much makes it risky for Chandler to stay in Oliveira's guard for too long. That said, I can see Charles finishing this one on the feet. He's been tightening up his striking, and Chandler tends to leave himself even more open than Oliveira when he charges in. I think Charles can take advantage of this and land something clean, getting that TKO in the first or second round. But who knows? It wouldn't surprise me if Big Mike throws something wild and catch Charles. So if you ask me, this fight is pretty 50-50. But who do you guys have this Saturday night? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And like always, guys, I'll see you guys on my next one.